Toxic people often don't announce themselves with obvious cruelty or overt hostility. Instead, their presence creeps into your life subtly through manipulation, control, and emotional volatility. Recognizing the patterns of toxic behavior is the first essential step in developing the kind of mental strength that can respond with grace rather than crumbling under pressure or losing control. A strong mind isn't one that never gets hurt or offended, but one that understands what it's dealing with and knows how to handle it with clarity, poise, and self-respect. Toxic individuals can take many forms: friends who constantly guilt-trip you, co-workers who gaslight or sabotage, family members who thrive on drama, or partners who use love as a weapon. What they all have in common is a tendency to distort reality and challenge your sense of self-worth. They often rely on subtle manipulations rather than outright attacks, which makes it harder to recognize the damage they cause until you're already entangled. One of the first signs of toxicity is inconsistency: people who are warm one moment and cold the next, loving today and punishing tomorrow. This keeps you off balance, constantly trying to earn approval or avoid conflict, which feeds their sense of control. A strong mind pays attention to these shifts. It doesn't excuse them with "maybe they're just having a bad day" over and over. It watches patterns, not isolated events. If someone repeatedly twists your words, questions your memories, or makes you feel like you're always the problem, those are not coincidences. That's gaslighting. If someone undermines your confidence, competes with your happiness, or only supports you when it benefits them, those are not friends. They are emotional saboteurs. Recognizing toxic behavior doesn't mean immediately cutting people out of your life, though sometimes that's the right decision. It begins with understanding. You don't confront what you don't fully see. You don't defend yourself effectively if you don't understand what's being attacked. This awareness is the armor that allows a strong mind to stay grounded and clear even under emotional fire. Part of developing this awareness is learning to trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, confusing, or exhausting every time you interact with a person, it probably is. Strong minds don't gaslight themselves. They don't say, "Maybe I'm just being too sensitive," when they're repeatedly hurt. They ask, "Why do I feel so drained after talking to this person?" And they take the answer seriously. They analyze their own patterns too, because toxic people often latch onto those who struggle with boundaries, people pleasing, or fear of conflict. Self-inquiry is just as important as external observation. Ask yourself, what am I tolerating because I'm afraid to be seen as rude? What behavior have I normalized in the name of keeping the peace? Often, strong minds were not born, they were built. Many come from experiences of being wounded, manipulated, or dismissed, but instead of becoming cynical or vengeful, they learned to see clearly. They know that grace doesn't mean submission, and that compassion doesn't require sacrificing self-respect. One of the most powerful realizations is that you can observe someone's toxic behavior without needing to fix them. You don't owe anyone your emotional labor. Just because someone is hurt doesn't give them the right to hurt you. Strong minds know how to hold space for understanding, for empathy, but also for themselves. They can say, "I see what you're doing, and I'm choosing not to engage." That's not weakness, it's discipline. And once you start seeing the patterns, once you can name the games being played, you take back your power. Toxic people thrive in confusion. They want you uncertain, reactive, and dependent. But when you're calm, informed, and intentional, they lose their grip. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop chasing peace from people who benefit from chaos. You become unshakable not because you avoid conflict, but because you confront it with wisdom. The ability to recognize toxic behavior isn't just a survival skill, it's a foundation. Everything else, setting boundaries, responding instead of reacting, protecting your peace, and ultimately healing, flows from this first act of clarity. Because you can't stand your ground if you don't know what you're standing on. And so, the first and most vital move in facing toxic people with strength and grace is this. Open your eyes, trust your inner signals, and call things what they are. When you're under fire, emotionally ambushed by someone toxic, it's easy to react. Maybe you raise your voice, say something you regret, or walk away feeling like you lost control. That's what toxic people count on. They want you disoriented and off balance. They thrive in chaos, especially when they cause it. But strong minds don't give them that satisfaction. Instead of reacting, they respond, and there's a world of difference between the two. Reacting is impulsive. It comes from a place of emotional turbulence. Someone insults you, and you snap back. Someone disrespects you, and you rush to defend yourself with anger or sarcasm. But when you do that, you're handing them control. You're letting their behavior dictate your emotional state. That's not power, that's reactivity. And in the long run, it leaves you drained, ashamed, or resentful. Responding, on the other hand, is deliberate. It comes from a place of strength, not insecurity. It's choosing how to engage instead of being pulled into someone else's dysfunction. A strong mind doesn't deny emotions. It acknowledges them. You feel hurt, angry, betrayed. You feel like screaming, crying, or shutting down. All of that is valid. But strength means stepping back and creating a pause between what happens and what you choose to do about it. That pause is everything. It's where your grace lives. In that moment you ask, what's the outcome I want here? Is this person trying to provoke me? Is my response going to bring clarity or just more chaos? One of the most powerful tools you can develop is emotional regulation, not repression, but regulation. That means taking a breath when someone is pushing your buttons. It means allowing yourself to feel everything fully, but not letting those feelings steer the wheel. Toxic people love to provoke emotional outbursts because it shifts the focus away from their behavior and puts you on the defensive. But when you remain calm, when you meet their storm with stillness, they have nothing to work with. This isn't about being passive or fake. Responding doesn't mean you sugarcoat the truth or avoid hard conversations. It means you stay rooted in your values and communicate with clarity, not volatility. You can say, I don't appreciate the way you're speaking to me. Or I'm not going to continue this conversation if it stays disrespectful, without raising your voice or matching their aggression. That kind of composure is disarming. It takes away their power to escalate, and it gives you the upper hand, not in a controlling way, but in a self-protective one. In many ways, responding is a practice in restraint, and that kind of restraint requires self-knowledge. You have to know your triggers. You have to know what kinds of comments or tactics get under your skin, and prepare yourself to face them without collapsing into reactivity. Preparation is key. When you anticipate someone's patterns like passive-aggressive jabs, gaslighting, or guilt trips, you can meet them with quiet certainty instead of surprise. You stop being a target and start being a mirror. You reflect back reality instead of absorbing their toxicity. Strong minds also understand timing. You don't have to respond to everything immediately. You're allowed to say, I need time to think about this, or I'll get back to you later. Toxic people often use urgency to pressure you into bad decisions or emotional confrontations. But you don't owe anyone your immediate availability, especially when your emotional balance is on the line. A thoughtful delay can be more powerful than the most eloquent comeback, and sometimes the strongest response is silence. Not the kind that's meant to punish or manipulate, but the kind that signals, I will not engage on these terms. You're not stonewalling. You're conserving your energy. You're refusing to play a game that only leads to harm. That silence can be louder than shouting, because it communicates boundaries without hostility. Learning to respond rather than react is not about being emotionless. It's about emotional maturity. It's about showing up with intention, not impulse. When you respond with grace, you're not suppressing your truth. You're elevating it. You're saying, I see what you're doing, but I choose to stay rooted in who I am, not who you're trying to make me become. And once you master that, everything changes. You stop living in defense mode. You stop being dragged into emotional warfare. You begin to reclaim your peace, one deliberate word, one thoughtful silence at a time. One of the hardest things to do when dealing with toxic people is to set boundaries, and to do it without guilt. For many of us, boundaries feel unnatural, even wrong. We're taught to be polite, accommodating, and agreeable. We're told that kindness means saying yes, even when it costs us our peace. But strong minds know that real kindness begins with honesty, and that protecting your mental and emotional space is not selfish. It's essential. Setting boundaries isn't about shutting people out. It's about defining what kind of behavior you will or won't accept. Toxic people don't respect limits. In fact, they often see your kindness as an invitation to take more. If you give an inch, they'll take a mile, and then make you feel guilty for trying to take it back. They may call you dramatic, cold, or unforgiving when you finally draw the line. That's because boundaries threaten their control. A strong mind understands this and doesn't back down just because the other person gets uncomfortable. Discomfort is not a signal that you've done something wrong. It's often a sign that you're finally doing something right. The first step in setting boundaries is clarity. You need to know what you stand for and what crosses the line. If someone constantly interrupts your time, disrespects your values, or drains your energy, you have every right to address it directly, but that requires courage. It's not easy to say, I'm not available for this kind of conversation, or I won't tolerate being spoken to that way. It can feel awkward, confrontational, or even harsh, especially if you're used to keeping the peace at all costs. But peace built on silence and self-betrayal is not real peace. It's emotional debt, and sooner or later you'll pay for it. Strong minds speak up, not to start conflict, but to prevent ongoing harm. They use language that's calm but firm. They don't over-explain or seek approval. They know that no is a complete sentence, and that I need space doesn't require justification. This kind of communication might feel foreign at first, but it becomes easier with practice. Over time, it stops feeling like rejection and starts feeling like self-respect. The guilt that often comes with setting boundaries is something toxic people are quick to exploit. They'll say you're being selfish, disloyal, or overly sensitive. They'll twist your efforts to protect your well-being into acts of cruelty. But here's the truth. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always see your growth as betrayal. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're finally becoming someone they can't manipulate. There's nothing cruel about defining what's acceptable to you. You're not punishing anyone by asking for respect. You're just choosing not to sacrifice yourself to keep someone else comfortable. That's not aggression, it's alignment. Strong minds understand that boundaries are not weapons, they're guidelines for healthy interaction. They're not about control, they're about clarity. And when delivered with consistency and calm, they become one of the most powerful tools in dealing with toxic individuals. Consistency is key. You can't set a boundary and then abandon it the moment someone pushes back. Toxic people will test you. They'll ignore your limits, try to guilt you into bending them, or act as if your boundaries don't exist. And when that happens, it's not the time to explain harder. It's the time to enforce more clearly. Following through is what gives boundaries their strength. A strong mind doesn't just speak, it acts. If you say you won't engage in a certain type of conversation, and they bring it up anyway, you leave. If you say you need space and they keep pushing, you stop responding. It's not about being cruel, it's about being consistent. Eventually, those who can't respect your boundaries will fall away. That might be painful, especially if they're people you care about. But one of the marks of a strong, graceful mind is the ability to let go of what's harmful, even when it hurts. You realize that holding onto people who continually disrespect you is far lonelier than walking away. And then something powerful happens. You begin to attract healthier dynamics. You create space for relationships built on mutual respect rather than fear or obligation. You stop begging for peace from those who can't give it, and start building it within yourself. One of the greatest signs of mental strength in the face of toxic people is knowing what to protect. And it's not your pride, your ego, or your reputation. It's your peace. Toxic individuals are masters at dragging others into power struggles, emotional traps, and endless cycles of blame. They push buttons, twist words, and often operate from a place of insecurity masked as dominance. If you're not careful, you'll find yourself constantly trying to prove a point, win an argument, or defend your character. But strong minds realize this is a trap. You don't win by outshouting a toxic person. You win by refusing to play the game. Protecting your peace means recognizing when a conversation is no longer productive, when a relationship is draining instead of nourishing, and when your presence in a situation is costing you more than it's giving. Strong individuals know that not every battle is worth fighting. Not every insult requires a reply. Not every misunderstanding deserves your explanation. When your sense of self is strong, you don't need to prove it through conflict. You can walk away not in defeat, but in confidence. This doesn't mean that you never speak up or that you tolerate mistreatment. It means you're strategic. You conserve your energy for actions that matter instead of arguments that go nowhere. You choose silence when it's wiser than shouting. You let go of the need to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. And most importantly, you let go of the illusion that you can change someone who doesn't want to change. That's not grace, that's entrapment. Strong minds don't confuse hope with responsibility. You can wish someone well without sacrificing yourself trying to fix them. There's a certain kind of freedom that comes from understanding this. When you stop letting toxic people dictate your emotional climate, you begin to reclaim your inner calm. You realize that their behavior isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their wounds. And while you can acknowledge that with compassion, you don't have to stay close to the fire just because you understand why it burns. You can care from a distance. You can forgive without reconnecting. You can let go without losing your values. Ego will tell you to keep fighting. It will tell you that walking away makes you weak, or that if you don't get the last word, you've lost. But peace tells a different story. It says, you don't need this to be resolved in order to move forward. You don't need to be right in order to be at ease. Letting go of the need to win is one of the most powerful things you can do. It means you value your sanity over someone else's validation. It means you've reached a place where your calm is more important than their chaos. Sometimes, protecting your peace means making hard decisions. It might mean distancing yourself from people you love. It might mean saying no to traditions, family gatherings, or friendships that are rooted in obligation rather than mutual respect. It might mean choosing quiet over company, solitude over shallow connection, and it might mean standing alone but with your values intact and your heart unburdened. People will not always understand your choices, especially when you start putting your well-being first. They may accuse you of being cold, selfish, or distant, but their discomfort is not your responsibility. Your job is not to carry the emotional weight of others just to keep them comfortable. Your job is to protect the inner space where your peace lives, because once that is gone, everything else begins to fall apart. Grace under fire means having the presence of mind to choose calm over chaos, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over reactivity. It means recognizing that your emotional energy is limited and refusing to waste it on people who feed off your instability. Strong minds make peace a priority, not a reward. They don't wait for the world to calm down. They learn to anchor themselves even when the storm rages on. And in doing so, they reclaim their power quietly, firmly, and without apology. When you finally faced a toxic person with clarity, responded instead of reacted, set your boundaries and protected your peace, there's one more challenge that remains: choosing how to move forward. And this is where many people stumble. Because after the confrontation, after the withdrawal or the fallout, you're left with something quieter but just as difficult: healing. And the truth is, strong minds don't just shut down and harden after toxic experiences. They choose to heal. They choose to grow. They refuse to let pain define them. It's tempting to armor up. After you've been manipulated, dismissed, or used, a part of you may want to build walls, trust no one, and expect the worst. That's a natural reaction. Your mind wants to protect you from ever being hurt like that again. But strength isn't about becoming emotionally numb. It's not about replacing kindness with bitterness or replacing openness with suspicion. True strength is choosing to keep your heart open while being wiser about who you give it to. A strong mind understands that healing is not about forgetting or pretending the damage didn't happen. It's about integrating what you've learned so that the pain doesn't control you anymore. The goal isn't to erase the past. It's to stop it from shaping your future. Toxic people leave scars, yes, but those scars can become reminders of growth, not symbols of defeat. You learn not just who they were, but who you became in the process. You start to see how the confrontation made you clearer, more self-aware, more capable of protecting yourself in healthy ways. Healing also means releasing the need for closure. With toxic individuals, you rarely get it. They may never admit what they did. They might deny, deflect, or rewrite history. Waiting for their accountability can trap you in a cycle of frustration. A strong mind accepts that closure doesn't always come from them, it comes from you. You decide to stop waiting for an apology, and instead, you give yourself the permission to move on. You stop analyzing every word and action, and you start focusing on what's next for your own peace and growth. Another part of healing is allowing yourself to grieve. Yes, even if the person was toxic, because not all losses are black and white. You might still miss the good moments, the connection, the version of them you hoped they would be. And that's okay. You're not weak for feeling sad about someone who hurt you. You're human. Grieving what could have been is part of the healing process. But staying stuck there is not. A strong mind feels the loss but doesn't live in it. You also begin to look inward, not for blame, but for understanding. You ask yourself honest questions. What patterns did I ignore? What fears kept me silent? What wounds made me vulnerable to manipulation? And you don't ask these things to shame yourself, you ask them to grow. Self-compassion is essential. You can't heal while attacking yourself for having been in pain. Strong minds forgive themselves first. They recognize that they did the best they could with what they knew at the time, and now, with new knowledge, they move differently. As healing deepens, something beautiful happens. You stop seeing the toxic person as the center of the story. They become a chapter, not the whole book. You no longer define yourself by how someone else treated you. You stop saying, "I'm the person who was hurt," and start saying, "I'm the person who learned, who grew, who overcame." And that shift from pain to power is what Grace Under Fire is all about. You begin to realize that healing is not just recovery, it's transformation. It's taking what was meant to break you and using it to build boundaries, clarity, empathy, and resilience. It's learning to spot red flags early, to trust your gut, to walk away sooner. It's also learning not to become like the person who hurt you. Because toxic people often come from pain they never addressed. You choose differently. You choose to heal so you don't pass on the pain. And that is where real strength lies, not in being untouched by hurt, but in being touched and still choosing love, still choosing light, still choosing to grow.